She came crawling out of the dusk, barefoot, wrapped in rags that weren't enough to cover a child, much less a grown woman. Her dress, if it could still be called that, hung in strips around her legs, dragging through the snow like torn flags on a windless pole. One hand gripped a limp rabbit by its hind legs, blood black against the white, frozen string cutting into her fingers. Her lips were split, her knuckles raw. She didn't shiver. She didn't cry. The wind tore at her like it wanted her gone, but she kept walking. The homestead stood alone in the wide hollow, a crooked silhouette against the red sky bleeding into blue. Smoke lifted from the chimney, the only sign of warmth in a world too cold for mercy. She limped the last stretch, her eyes sunken, cracked with frost, lifted once toward the porch. Two figures watched from the window, shadows behind a lace-curtained pane. Then the door creaked open, just an inch, just enough. The mouth of a shotgun peeked out. She didn't flinch. She knelt. Her knees sank into the snow with a soft crunch. The rabbit slid from her hand, landing beside her like an offering. Her voice was barely a thread of breath. "Take me in. I'll feed your kids and warm your home. I won't let them starve again." Nothing moved for a long moment, not even the wind. Then the barrel dipped and disappeared. The door didn't open wider, but it didn't close. Inside, the warmth clawed at her skin like it didn't know what to do with her. She stood in the entryway dripping meltwater and silence. Her eyes flicked once toward the fire, then away. A little girl stood clutching a stuffed bear, missing one ear. A boy older than her stared from the table, hands tucked beneath his arms. The man said nothing. He stood with the shotgun lowered, boots thick with mud, eyes dark and unreadable. His face was a map of angles and old grief, beard untrimmed, eyes sunken but not dead. A cane leaned by the hearth, polished smooth by use. The scar on his jaw ran through the stubble, like a river through dust. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. Instead, she reached for the rabbit. Her hands trembled when she skinned it, not from weakness, but memory. The blade she used was dull, hers not his. She'd brought it with her, hidden in her dress. She bled once when it slipped. Didn't react. Didn't wince. The children watched her every movement. So did he. She boiled water, cleaned the meat, and set it to stew. She found roots in a sack near the stove and chopped them fine. Not a word passed between them. When the food was done, she served the children first, then him. She didn't take a bowl, just gathered bones into a rag and swept the floor with a piece of kindling. She slept that night by the hearth, curled like a dog on a braided rug. No blanket, no invitation. She didn't touch the fire, let it warm her back but not her bones. The boy's whisper cracked the silence hours later. "She smells like Mama did." The next morning, she rose before the sun and had the coals stirred and the coffee hot when Ezekiel limped into the room. She didn't smile. She didn't look at him. She just handed him the tin cup and went back to scrubbing the pot. He watched her for a long time, then said, flat as the land outside, "Woodpile's low." She stood, walked outside into the snow, and began splitting logs. By the second day, the girl followed her everywhere. By the third, Ezekiel left his rifle leaning by the door instead of cradled in his arms. No one knew her name. No one asked. The boy started calling her ma'am, and the girl just clung to her dress like she'd always been there. At night, after the children slept, Ezekiel sat at the table with his pipe and watched her patch torn clothes with horsehair thread. Still no questions. Still no answers. The ridge that loomed behind the homestead cast long shadows. Wind pushed through it like a train of ghosts. At dusk, crows gathered in the trees, black knots against the ash-gray sky. Ezekiel noticed how they always seemed to follow her, even when she walked to the well or fetched eggs from the half-dead coop. He didn't ask why. The world outside was cruel and small. The nearest town lay 20 miles east, over broken ridges and through thorn-thick scrub. Folks there whispered about a witch woman seen near the high trail, skin like burnt parchment, eyes like a dead horse's. They said she spoke to the wind, that she fed on the blood of coyotes and cursed every man who laid hands on her. Ezekiel didn't believe in curses, but he did believe in pain, and she wore it like a second skin. She never looked him in the eye. not out of fear, but habit, as if the world had already looked too long and given her nothing back. That first week, she said only what needed saying. More salt. Water's boiling. Child's fever's gone. The rest, she did with hands. She stitched the boy's boot with sinew from the rabbit's leg, brushed the girl's hair with fingers instead of a comb, mended a curtain with bark twine. One night, Ezekiel caught her staring at the mantel, not the fire, but a small tin photograph in a dented frame, his wife, smiling in the last spring before the sickness came. He expected her to ask. She didn't. Instead, she said softly, she had kind eyes. And that was all. Days turned to rhythm. She hunted when food ran low, her aim sharper than his own. She tracked a squirrel and returned with 3. He asked nothing, just watched the blood on her cuffs and nodded. She cleaned the chimney, dug a trench to redirect runoff, stripped bark to line the chicken pen. Not once did she ask to stay. Not once did he ask her to leave. Then came the night the girl woke crying, soaked in sweat, choking on fever. Ezekiel panicked, arms trembling as he tried to remember old remedies. But she was already moving, hands firm, eyes steady, voice low as thunder rolling across far hills. Boil yarrow. Strip her down. Let the steam carry it out. She held the girl through the night, whispering lullabies in a language no one knew. By morning, the child's fever broke. Ezekiel found her asleep, sitting upright with the girl wrapped in her arms. She hadn't taken a blanket. Again, he laid one over her shoulders. Later, he found his wife's old boots tucked in a chest. He placed them near the hearth. The next morning, they were on the woman's feet. She didn't thank him, didn't smile, just walked to the woodpile and kept chopping. He didn't know if she'd seen her reflection in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. But when the children laughed that day, and the woman's shoulders rose and fell like wind in tall grass, something in her face softened. Almost. That night, after the children were asleep, Ezekiel stood by the door, looking out at the dark. The woman sat behind him, mending the boy's jacket. He said, barely above a breath, "Ain't no one asked you to stay." She threaded the needle. "I know, but you're still here." She tied off the stitch. "There's still work to do." He turned then, met her eyes in the firelight. "You running from someone?" She met his gaze without flinching. "No, just running from nothing left." He nodded once. That was enough. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the fire burned slow and steady, and no one went cold. Word spreads like smoke. A woman, strange, quiet, half-wild, living up in Ezekiel Boone's cabin, caring for his young uns like she was planted there by God or devil. The old men at the grain store shake their heads. The schoolmarm stops waving when she passes by in town. Folks mutter under breath and behind doors, "That ain't his kin." Someone hisses by the well, "She's a hex come down the hill." Another replies. One Sunday, Ezekiel stands silent at the feed store, sack of oats in one hand, watching the pastor weigh flour. "You bring darkness in," the pastor says, not looking up. It stays. Ezekiel doesn't answer, just drops the coins on the counter and limps back to his wagon. That night, long after the children are asleep and the fire is low, a rock crashes through the front window. Glass shatters across the floor. Cold rushes in. She moves without a sound, crouching low, her back against the wall, eyes scanning the dark like she's done this before. Boone rises slower, favoring the old wound in his leg, shotgun steady in hand. Outside, only wind and shadows. No one seen. No one sorry. By morning, the girl won't leave her side, clings to her apron with small, pale fingers. When she hums, soft, old songs no one knows, the child hums with her. Boone watches her more now. Not out of suspicion, not anymore, but something heavier. She's outside chopping wood again, bare arms scarred and pale, breath rising like smoke. Her back's turned. A gust lifts the hem of her shirt. Scars ladder her spine like rope burns or lashings, old and raw even still. He looks away before she turns. She doesn't stop working, doesn't seem to notice the blood where the axe handle's bitten her palm. She never complains. Sometimes she goes still by the fire, staring at nothing, lips moving without voice. Once, she takes the girl's hair in her hands, braiding it slow and trembling. Her eyes shine wet, but she doesn't cry. Just braids, then presses her lips to the child's crown, whispering words no one hears. Boone finds her standing in the barn days later, face to the corner, shoulders shaking, arms wrapped around herself, like they're the only warmth left. He doesn't ask what memory found her. Some nights, she lights the hearth and whispers into the flame. Not this time. Like a promise. Or a prayer. She once had children. He knows this now, not because she says it, but because it hangs in the air every time the girl laughs. In the way her hands twitch when the boy speaks too quickly, and how she flinches at thunder and won't sleep near the walls. Boone begins to change, too. He trims his beard, shaves slow and careful, with soap she made from lard and herbs, fixes the back fence, even though the goats are long gone, finds the broken doll the girl cried over last spring, and stitches the arm back on. He paints the porch rail, one stroke at a time. He doesn't speak to her more, but he watches, like he's trying to remember how people live. One evening, the stew runs thin. She sets 3 spoons on the table, hesitates, then pulls one back. "They can have mine," she says. "I've eaten before." Boone slides his plate toward her, without a word. She takes it. The children don't notice. Or maybe they do, and choose not to speak of it. She dreams sometimes. Boone hears her through the wall, muffled gasps, a low no, repeated over and over, soft as frost. He never wakes her. But in the morning, he leaves extra coffee in the pot. They don't talk about it. Not until the day they come. 3 men on horseback. Midday. Dust caked on their boots and hunger in their eyes. Boone sees them first from the fields, scythe in hand. The woman's get must twist, because she gathers the children inside before the hooves even echo. He meets them at the porch. The one in front grins through crooked teeth. "Well, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to find her dressed up playing house." She stands in the doorway behind Boone. Still. Silent. The man leans on the horn of his saddle, spitting into the dirt. "Sorry to interrupt your happy little frontier, but I'm here for what's mine." Boone doesn't move. Doesn't speak. "She's property," the man continues, voice oily. "Run off from the Keene ranch. Traded fair by her husband. Sack of sugar, some salt, and a winter coat. She's got no claim to nothing." Behind him, the other 2 chuckle. The woman's hands tighten on the doorframe. Her eyes don't blink. The man grins again. "Come on, darling. Let's not make this messy. Ain't worth no gunfire." Boone lowers the scythe, picks up the shotgun resting beside the porch rail. "You best ride on," he says. The man snorts. "Really? For her? Hell, Boone, you know what she is. She ain't worth dying for." Boone chambers around. "Maybe not," he says, voice low, steady. "But she's worth living for." Silence. Even the wind stops to listen. The lead man's eyes narrow. The horses paw the dirt, restless. Boone doesn't flinch. Behind him, the woman doesn't move. One of the others mutters, "Ain't worth it, Eli." The man named Eli spits again. Looks once at the shotgun, then at the eyes behind it. Finally, he reins his horse around. "Suit yourself," he says over his shoulder. "But don't come crying when she brings fire on your house. That kind of woman don't carry peace long." They ride off. Dust trails behind them like smoke from a fuse. Boone lowers the shotgun. The woman turns back into the house. He follows her. That night, neither speaks of it. But when she lights the hearth, her voice is louder. "Not this time," she says. And this time, Boone hears it. Winter stayed longer than it should have, like it was waiting to see if this new shape of life would hold. But the men didn't return. No more hoofbeats, no more shattered windows, no more whispered curses from the woods. Whatever had driven them up the ridge lost its teeth in the silence that followed. Boone never spoke of it again. Didn't have to. The way he sat by the window each night, eyes on the road, was enough. The shotgun stayed near, but it gathered dust now. She stayed, too. Not in the corner, not behind the stove, not as something temporary. She belonged now. It wasn't in what she was given, but what she did without asking. She mended what tore, warmed what froze, held what trembled. The girl followed her like a shadow. The boy looked to her before he spoke. Boone moved around her now like she was part of the space, not a guest, but a fixture, a thread in the weave. One morning, after a thaw left slush in the yard, she sat on the porch mending a broken boot. The heel had come loose. She didn't say a word about it, just found some old thread in a drawer and began sewing. Her fingers moved slow, methodical, like she'd done it 1,000 times for someone long gone. The boy came outside, squinted against the pale sun, then wrapped his arms around her leg without warning. She stilled, looked down at his face, said nothing, just lowered her hand and let it rest in his hair. That night, the stew tasted of something wild and bright, juniper or rosemary, and they all ate in a hush that wasn't sadness, just peace. When the children were in bed, Boone stayed at the table while she cleared dishes. He cleared his throat once, then again. Finally, his voice broke through, rough as gravel. "Maribel." She froze. The plate slipped from her hand, but didn't fall. Just hovered a moment, then settled back in the basin. He said it again, softer, like the sound of her name carried weight he hadn't earned. "Maribel." She turned then, eyes glassed but clear. Something in her mouth trembled, not fear, just memory. "It's been a long time since someone remembered," she whispered. He nodded once, didn't look away. Later, he climbed the ladder to the loft and came back with something wrapped in linen. Laid it on the table. She unfolded it with care. His wife's quilt, warm but whole, blues and ochres and rust reds sewn tight across the ears. She didn't ask why, didn't speak at all. That night, she laid it not over herself, but over the children. The wind howled through the trees, but inside, the house held steady. The next morning, she took a knife from the kitchen drawer and climbed onto the hearth. There was a beam there, rough and untouched. With slow, careful strokes, she carved her name into it. "Maribel." She stepped down without turning. Boone rose from the table and followed. He took the same knife and carved his name just beneath hers. Ezekiel. No one said anything. The day stretched out like a slow song. Snow melted from the eaves. Mud thickened the path from the barn to the house. Birds returned, shy and stuttering. Boone's limp grew less pronounced as the cold loosened its grip. Maribel took the children out to the field with a pail of seeds and showed them how to find the softest soil, how to kneel, not stomp, how to listen to the earth before you touch it. She held the girl's hand and pressed it into the dirt. "Things grow slow," she said, "but they grow." Boone stood on the porch with one hand on the frame, watching. The wind stirred his shirt, caught in the graying curls of his hair. He didn't move. Didn't need to. He was rooted, too. She taught the children songs. None in English, but they sang them anyway. The syllables tasted like firewood and rain, and they didn't ask where the words came from, only that she smiled when they sang them back. One afternoon, Boone found the boy carving letters into a board near the back steps. He sat beside him in the dirt and showed him how to hold the knife right, how to dig just enough, not too deep. The girl came running a while later with her arms full of dandelions, shouting, "Mama, Mama, look." She meant Maribel. No one corrected her. That night, Boone brought in a strip of fresh cedar and laid it by the hearth. He handed Maribel the same knife she'd used weeks before. She took it. The children watched wide-eyed as she carved a single word beneath the others. Hope. And below that, a name none of them had spoken yet. One she had been saving. It wasn't hers. Wasn't his. A new name. One yet to be born. The house held its breath. Boone leaned against the doorframe, his hand brushing over the name as though to seal it into the grain. Maribel stood beside him, the firelight touching her face like dawn. Outside, the ground had begun to green. The children played barefoot in the muck, squealing as earthworms wriggled from thawed earth. Maribel sat on the stoop, mending a shirt, belly full and rising slow beneath her apron. Boone sat beside her, pipe cold in his hand, not needing smoke. The field stretched wide in front of them, wild, half-tilled, waiting. Behind them, the house stood quiet and strong. Above the fireplace, 3 names now, and on the doorframe, beside the marks where the children's heights had been scratched year by year, A new name freshly carved. A girl, maybe. Or maybe a boy. Didn't matter. Born of silence, fire, and second chances. As dusk settled and the wind moved through the chimney in low song, Maribel whispered to the quiet around her, "I won't let them starve again." And the house listened.